I'm happy to have you all back to have another CPA interview discussion with a special guest today by the name of Mr. Calvin Harris Jr. Currently serves as the CEO of the New York State Society of CPAs and held a former role as the president of the National Association of Black Accountants, correct?
That's correct.
So just happy to hear his thoughts and hopefully it'll bring value to the community. So Mr. Harris, thank you for joining and welcome.
Thank you, Christopher. I appreciate the work you're doing, so I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I have a passion for wanting to get more people to just understand the opportunities in accounting and see more people benefit from, the things that the two of us have shared in this profession. So I just want to get your story. So let's start with, I like to start the discussion with the not with the traditional why did you become a CPA, but more with can you tell us what do you think is the biggest benefit you've seen so far with becoming a CPA?
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for having me here, Christopher. I really appreciate the time. Gosh, saying one benefit is tough, but what immediately comes to mind is just the opportunities in general that have come from being a CPA. Mm-hmm. As it turns out, I've been certified for almost 25 years, so pretty long time at this point. But even when I became a CPA, I knew there would be additional opportunities that would come from it, but I had no idea just how many and how diverse the opportunities would be and could be from becoming a CPA. So that's really been the biggest impact for me, is just the opportunities that came from it.
So, it's funny because I feel like when I do ask that question, the one response I get is, there's so many opportunities, and I think that's there's so many opportunities. Yeah, right. But I often wonder if a viewer is like, well, but I want to understand more what that opportunity is. Do you think you have one that's maybe a specific example of something that you could share in terms of opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can go from where I am right now and even go back a little bit further. So I am the Chief Executive Officer, CEO of the New York State Society of CPAs. So it's essentially representing more than 22,000 CPAs here in the great state of New York. I never aspired to be a CEO of anything. I still think of myself as just an accountant. So that's one opportunity that came from being a CPA. Before that, I was the Chief Financial Officer, CFO of the National Urban League, which does amazing work, has historically done amazing work for the organization again. But for me being a CPA, that would have not been an opportunity that came for me. And then as I go further and further back throughout my career, opportunity after opportunity, not just in terms of jobs, because you can easily say, okay, this job came my way, but then even just the broader thought as a CPA, you're considered a business expert. Sometimes right, sometimes right or wrong, some cases, but there is a prestige that comes from having that credential that is hard to replicate. There are a lot of great certifications out there. There's no doubt about that, but there are very few that the public is aware of, to where, hey, you're a CPA, then there's an assumption that you know what you're talking about in business. There's also assumptions you do taxes, which isn't always the case, but there still is that expertise that comes just from having that credential.
And thank you for sharing that, because I think that's the main message that I really want for someone who's considering, like, in their career, right? Maybe they're thinking, I don't know, I want to go into business, I want to do something, right? But why should I pay attention to accounting or becoming a CPA? And it's like, well, there are a lot of opportunities. Well, what does that mean? Well, in your case, you've gotten to kind of go from one opportunity in terms of a career opportunity or a job to the next, in a way where you are in the role or position that you hadn't seen yourself in, I guess, prior to and some years back. So
that's exactly right. Yep.
So I think the common message, that we're trying to say is there are opportunities available for anyone who goes at it and passes the CPA exam, makes that investment in themselves to become a
Right.
CPA, there are like a lot of different paths that you can walk down. So I think that's really good. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
So
no problem, Michael.
I want to ask this question. I was on LinkedIn, and I think one of the reasons I reached out because I saw a post that you said, here's my path. You graduated from an
Right.
HBCU, Morehouse.
Yeah.
Then you were short a few credits and went to, I think it was the University of Baltimore, Maryland.
Yeah.
Was it Baltimore, Maryland County? And then
that's
you
right.
took the CPA exam. It looked like 5 times and wasn't successful in passing.
More or less.
Right.
That's how many I remember. Right.
But you passed, and
Right.
look at the success, that I'm going to call it success that you've achieved to this day. Would you mind just maybe dialing back and walking us through your mindset at the time and kind of what you did to get over the hurdle of the challenges of the CPA exam?
Sure. No, I'm more than happy to talk about that. I think if anything, one thing that CPAs don't talk about enough, and I think this applies to CPAs of color as well, is that we're not willing to acknowledge when we don't succeed. It's so easy to say, "Oh, I did this, I did that, I had this job, I created it," but the differences in our lives usually come from those times when we fail and what happens after that. So I failed 4 times, 5 times. I'm honestly not sure. to be honest, it was a lot. It was a lot. Now, granted, when I took the CPA exam, the structure was very different. You could only take it twice. You can only take it twice a year. I think it was November and May. You took all 4 parts at the same time in a huge room. So the structure is very different. The exam remains the exam in terms of how challenging it is. So when I say I failed, let's say 5 for nice ease of math. When we say I failed 5 times, that means that for more than 2.5 years, I had to live with, oh, I'm going to try this again, and I had to keep sticking through. I don't say that there's anything special about me. I'm not saying that at all. But what's important in terms of why I wanted to share that was that I kept hearing other people who were successful with the exam saying that you really haven't failed until you've quit. So I'm like, I'm going to keep at this until I figure it out. And I learned a lot. First, I learned that, number one, you have to study. For more than a few of those times when I didn't pass, I didn't study properly. That's me. That's on me. That's my fault. That's no one else's fault. I didn't study the way I needed to. In some of the other cases, because I was early in my career and I didn't have as much control as I wanted to in terms of my own time, and I didn't manage my time as well as I needed to, I found it difficult to work in public accounting and study. That's going to sound familiar for a lot of folks because it is hard to balance. I wasn't able to do that. I knew lots of friends who were able to. I wasn't able to do that. But I think the end result is that I had to find a path that would work for me in terms of passing the exam. Now, when I passed it, I passed all 4 parts at one time. So you can look at it one of 2 ways. You can say, okay, I was smart enough to pass the entire exam in one sitting. Or you can also say, I was stupid enough to fail it 5 times before I figured it out. and probably both are true. Probably both are true.
Right.
But part of the reason, it's interesting you mentioned that particular post because that post seemed to have gotten more attention than anything else I've ever posted. I posted on LinkedIn quite a bit. And all it was just a listing of what happened. And my main point was just don't quit. Just don't give up. And especially on a podcast like this one, where I know who our audience is for, it is so critical as a person of color to not quit. The numbers are not in our favor in terms of how many of us there are. So, and in a sad way, you end up having more opportunities as a person of color, as a CPA, because there's so few of us, particularly when diversity is finally getting the sort of attention that it needs to. But just don't quit, because that was really the main lesson in there, is that, hey, I'm not ashamed to admit that I failed the exam. I mean,
I thank you for the transparency. I think that's something we try to capture in these interview discussions. And I think you hit it right on the head in terms of a personal message that I have for why we even have CPA diversity is as controversial as this may sound to some people, if you are someone who identifies as a person of color
Right.
and you choose to pursue an accounting career and become a CPA, there are more
Right.
opportunities for you right now than there
Yeah.
will be when we actually do get more people to come and pass the CPA exam and there's more of us, right? We don't want to
Yeah.
say, obviously, because we identify as a diverse ethnic background, a person of color, that's not the reason why opportunities are presented to us. At the end
Sure.
of the day, you pass the CPA exam, you get to show that you're someone who is qualified to do the job. At the same time, there is a focus on identifying more diversity in the profession, which does
Sure.
lead to opportunity. So
It
I
does.
think
Yeah.
that you said that very well. I'm glad you pointed it out. I'm glad you pointed out don't quit. One of the things
Yeah.
that I'm finding in interacting with our CPA diversity community is that people are finding the motivation to say, you know what, I'm going to give this another try. I see and I hear the stories and I feel like, you know what, I may have stopped, but I'm going to go back and do it. So I think that people are going to really draw a lot of inspiration from hearing you. Just encourage them to say, don't quit, hearing your story. But I do have one question though.
Sure.
How do you have to do from a study perspective to go from multiple times of not passing to
Yeah.
say, I passed all 4 parts this time in one
Yeah.
sitting? What kind
Yeah.
of shifted in your study habits or your mindset?
It was intense. I don't deny that. So for let's say 4 months before the exam, I would study on weekdays at least, and these are all the minimum amounts. So I'll put at least 3 hours a night, Monday through Friday.
Mhm.
At least 8 hours each day on Saturday and Sunday. So essentially, I treated the CPA exam as a part-time job, because if you do the raw math there, I was studying, and it's not quite. I'm rounding up a little bit. I averaged at least 30 hours a week studying. That was just me each week, without fail, with consistency. In some cases, that meant that I was not going to go out with friends. That was more important. It was more important for me to make that investment. I did that for 4 solid months. As I got closer to the exam, I felt a little weak in taxation, so I took a quick, intense prep class focused on taxation for the last, I think, for 1 weekend actually, just 10 hours each day. And then I took the last 2 weeks off from work. And each of those days in the last two weeks, I studied at least 10 hours each day. And then a few days before the exam, I took what I thought was a practice exam, and I did the entire exam 2 days in a row. So towards the end, and I also made a point of eliminating distractions. I realized that and I know we're talking on remotely now. I knew I couldn't study effectively at home. So I did all of my study at work. So what I would do, and I had the job, at this time I was no longer in public accounting, so I was able to do it this way. I could have still done this in public accounting, just when I'm a little different. I worked from like 8 to 5 or 8 to 6. And then at that point I stopped. And then I stayed in my office and I worked from 5 to 8 or 6 to 9. I made a point of bringing my dinner to the office, but I did not let myself even go home until I had studied for the day. Now, once I got home, I don't study at home. And then on the weekend, I would go to the library or to a coffee shop if I could control that thing. So, but the main thing is that I accepted, as much as I wanted to study at home, I accepted that that wasn't where I was best. So I put myself in a situation where I was going to be successful. And then by the time the exam came around, I'll be honest, I had a very different mindset. Here's a secret. I actually haven't told too many people this. Every day as I got closer to the exam in the morning, I literally looked in the mirror and said, I'm passing the exam. I told myself that every day, I'm passing the exam. This is the last time I'm passing the exam. And as corny as it might sound, at some point I actually believed it. despite having failed it so many times before, I believed it. And I kid you not, when I walked into the exam, I didn't just believe it, I knew it. I knew without a shadow of a doubt, irrespective of what had happened before, I knew I was going to pass the exam all I had to do was finish what was already destined at that point. So when I passed the exam, I gotta say I was excited. Obviously, I can't even say I was all that. I can't even say I was all that surprised at that point. Which how crazy did that sound? That you failed it 5 times, but then when you finally pass, you're not surprised. Well, because I knew I'd done all the work. I knew I had done the work at that point, but it took a lot of effort. There was really no shortcut. And I'll be honest, I had other colleagues before then saying, "This is what you got to do. This is what you got to do to pass the exam." And I didn't put in the work. I mean, heck, there are absolutely people who are so smart and so brilliant that they don't have to study and they can pass the exam. I'm sure they exist. I was not that person. I had to grind it out. I had to grind it out. So, am I proud that I passed all 4 parts at the same time? Sure, I absolutely am. But if you need each part at one time, who cares? At the end, we're all still a CPA. Doesn't matter how you got there. The thing is just getting there. But yeah, it was an intense process.
You know, I know we could just probably, as CPAs, we could just talk about this a long time, right?
Sure.
I want to hit on this. I want to hit on this a couple things before I transition. We're going to talk about after and more now what's going on. I think that one of the things I always want people to understand when they made their mind up to pass the CPA exam, it's almost like you've been watching my content. You have to commit. I always have these rules, and this is what I did too. I studied like a full-time job. I always say. You said I took a part-time job. I studied. I chose after college to just study. I didn't go straight into work. Luckily, I have family. Smart. Luckily, I have family who's willing to pay for me to do things like eat, right?
Sure.
But I took it serious. I studied 8 hours a day, and I really went in. One thing you said was that you had to affirm yourself. You had to tell yourself that you were going to pass the CPA exam. And it's so funny that I didn't remember that I used to do the same thing until you mentioned that. I used to look at myself in the mirror and say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be a CPA. In your own way, you tell yourself that, even because that study process it's not always fun. And I always say that. It's not like it's always fun. You're retaining information. But I used to sit in the mirror and say, what did I learn today? Okay, I learned this. I learned this. I learned this. Okay, I'm going to pass this exam. If I can remember this like this, I'm going to pass this exam. I used to always try to say, like, use your memory as your cheat sheet, right? Like, if you could walk into an exam and know the answers based on what's your mind, then you have the answers, right? And so to shorten it, I guess I would say, you were prepared, which is the next thing I always say. Try to know every single answer before you even walk into the exam. And it's funny enough that once you do that, you're not surprised that you pass because you've done all the work. People have to understand, especially I think people from diverse backgrounds, there is somewhat of a culture shock in the terms of studying, and I'm just talking about my environment, the people I'm around. They are not used to studying the way it's required to study for an exam like this. And I think you also hit that on the head in saying I had to change. And this is the last thing that I always feel like is an underestimated thing that I always tell people. You have to have the right environment. And that's something that you touched on that I feel like is so important. You said I had to stay at work. I didn't go home. When you go home, there's a totally different energy to your studying. It does something to your mind. It just says, I'm not in the study mode right now. But when you stayed home, you were in that frame of mind of I'm still working. I'm still going to do it. And that's what I used to do. I used to have a place where I would sit, I would study, and I knew when I was there, I was ready to retain knowledge. So like I said, I know we could go into the study process, but I think it's good for people to really take that serious, that there is a certain level of dedication in the study process, but also recognize that it's just a short period of your life. Oh, you said one more thing. Sorry. You said, I didn't have friends. You might have to tell your friends, I will see you in a few months,
That's right.
Or eliminate the distractions. Those are all things that are not necessarily studying the books and the contents that are very important to the study process. And look, look at the result. You make the investment, and then the opportunities that you open yourself up to once you become a CPA, you get that license, right? So
Exactly.
with that being said, I want to transition to the New York State Certified Public Accountants. And I think talking about that, we've had some previous discussion about the organization and your role. But I think talking about the organization, what they do for current CPAs, what they're doing for new future CPAs is very important because these organizations exist in every single state. So you are the CEO for New York State, and I'm sure there are a lot of things that are happening with the organization to support CPAs and future CPAs. So could you just kind of go into some of those things for us?
I'd love to do that. So just to frame it a bit, so to your point, there are 54, call them state societies, because you have the 50 states in the US, but then you have Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, and Guam. They also have it. So that's how you get to 54. So I know 50 states, but they're 54. New York, however, was the very first CPA society in the country. And many consider that this is the founding place of the CPA. So my office just happens to be on Wall Street. I'm right next door to the stock exchange. Right there is where the New York Stock Exchange is, and our original offices were right there. So I am honored to be the very first Black CEO in the history of the oldest CPA society in the country. As it is, there are only two of us right now. My good friend and colleague Ralph Albert Thomas, right over in New Jersey. Although I recently heard that the incoming CEO in Illinois is also a Black man. So there'll be three of us at least for a period of time. But beyond the numbers of it, and is broader thoughts in terms of what we do. So we're focused on all of the CPAs, all of the certified public accountants here in the great state of New York. So we represent them from a membership perspective. And that includes countless committees that are focused on technical issues. Some are focused on taxation or small firms, as well as individual chapters. New York's a pretty good sized state. So we have 15 chapters, so that wherever you are in this state, you have a group of CPAs near you. From the DEI perspective, we do have one of our committees focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's always important to mention equity as well. That focuses on that. We have a number of great sessions we do. There's a main conference we focus on. And then even within the organization, we have a DEI council that focuses on making sure that diversity, equity, inclusion is always top of mind. I like to remind folks that even though I am a clearly, you can just look at me, I'm a diverse candidate. I'm very proud to be a Black man, and as far as I can tell, probably the first CEO from an HBCU in a role like this. I'm still the CEO of all the CPAs here. I'm a CPA as well, licensed in the state of Maryland, as I mentioned, for almost 25 years. So I consider myself a great example of what being a CPA can do for you, and hopefully as a person of color, what being a Black CPA can also do. But the good thing about what we end up having here in New York is, because the state is so diverse in so many ways, whatever your interest is as a CPA, we've got a committee focused on. We have almost 60 different committees, 60 committees. So if you think of an area, we've got an area that focuses on it. So I think that ends up being really interesting, because regardless of what your focus is, you've got colleagues that can help you with your area, or you can discuss items with. Now, I talked about the CPAs. What about those who are looking to be CPAs? Well, we have that covered as well. For college students and high school students, we have free membership. So if you're in that space, you want to be a member, all you have to do is fill out the application. We'd love to have you there. And we have a very strong group of professors at colleges throughout, not just in New York State, but because this is a tri-state area. being
Right.
also including New Jersey and Connecticut. So it's very common for people to work within one another. So we have a diverse group of professionals and professors who also work to keep our students there. Now, in terms of awareness, we have a program called Co-op, Career Opportunities in Accounting Program, that's focused on high school students and
Got
making
it.
sure that those high school students get exposure. Historically, it's focused on students of color, Black and Latinx students, but it's actually open to all students because our big focus is making sure that you have that exposure. Now, we didn't mention it earlier, but my late mother was a high school bookkeeping teacher. So my
Wow.
exposure to the accounting profession began at home.
Mm.
But CPA, there aren't that many. I'm trying to think of a good TV show. I can't think of a single TV show or movie with a CPA involved to where there wasn't something a little off with them. So we don't have those great lawyer shows or doctor shows saying, "Oh, here's what you can do,"
Right.
and there's often the misnomer that accounting can be boring. Well,
Right.
I would say if you really, and I'm not trying to knock my colleagues in other professions, but if you look at all the other professions, you'll see that there are ups and downs in all roles.
Right.
But I'm here to tell you that accounting can be as exciting as you choose to make it.
Right.
But we have to make sure that they get exposed early. So I'm really excited to be a part of an organization here at the Society that's focused on not just our members, because of course we're a membership organization, so my members are a key and top priority for them, but
Right.
also making sure that we're identifying the pipeline of as soon as high school, try to make sure the students are engaged. And that of course includes students of color, because as we look at the accounting pipeline in general is a bit problematic in terms of needing more people to come into the profession. It's even more of a challenge when it comes to students of color, whether we're talking about Black, Latinx, Asian, Native, Indigenous, whatever demographic we want to look at, we'll see the same sort of challenge. It's a little more challenging in some areas than others, but
Right.
it's a broad issue within the profession. So it's something we're very much focused on. And the way I like to say it, it's not just the right thing to do, because it is the right thing to do, by the way. It's also good business to
Right.
make sure that the people within this profession resemble the people in the general population that we're going to be serving.
Right.
So I would say, I always like to add on that right now, it is absolutely a strong market for those who are looking for opportunities.
Yes.
Most organizations that are needing CPAs can't find enough.
Oh, wow.
We literally can't find enough. Now, these things often do come in waves, but I got to say, as I mentioned, I've been a CPA for a long time. There's never been a point in my career, never, and I don't say that word very often, to where if I was looking for a job, that there wasn't an opportunity out there, simply because I was a CPA.
There it is. There it is. I mean, you're talking about not just job security in terms of I'm in a job that I feel like I'm not going to lose, but you're talking about having options because of the skill sets that you bring. And
right.
I don't want our viewers to get lost in thinking, this is a discussion about how you need to be a person of color to have these opportunities. Even in your role as a CEO at the New York State Society of CPAs, you are responsible for the benefit of all CPAs, regardless of color. This discussion about color is always a add-on to the value of the profession and the license. So I just want everybody to understand that even in your role as a CEO, you are looking out for the interests of everyone. But we do have this particular shared interest in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, where we know not only is it the right thing to do, but it's good business to have more ideas, more backgrounds, more experiences come to the table to solve the problems that businesses and companies and individuals face out in our global economy. So the New York State Society of CPAs is one of 54 organizations in the country that are supporting CPAs after they pass the exam, but also supporting students and candidates in how they are going to become a CPA. And if you're a student and you're a candidate looking to become a CPA, encouraged to go and join one of these, find your local chapter or your local organization, and join and network and understand and share your goals, because there are people who can help navigate you to the right way. And the application is free. And for New York State, and I think when we were talking previously,
at least if you're a student, if you're a professional, there is a
there's a
pay.
Let's clear that up. Right. You're making money now, so you can pay.
That's right.
No, but if you're a student, it's a free membership, and I think you said that that's probably the case in a lot of different states. So you should take the opportunity to join and get involved, because that can help to support your goal of becoming a CPA and ultimately achieving success. So I'm glad we talked about that. And
could I throw in just a
sure.
little bit else in there? Because certainly as CEO of the New York Society, this one is my focus, as well as my colleagues in the other states. I would certainly want to add in organizations like the AICPA, which is focused national, frankly international. I'm a proud member of the AICPA as well, and in many cases, again, for most of us, I know when we look at leaders in our society, we look for you to be a member of both New York and the AICPA. Right. So certainly you look at the AICPA, and then for people of color, and frankly, even if you're not a person of color, certainly we want to make sure you look at organizations like NABA, National Association of Black Accountants, where I a number of years ago was a chairman of the board, national president, Alpha for our Latinx colleagues, Ascend for our Asian colleagues. There are many other organizations, also the National Society of Black CPAs, a newer organization, but also focused on Black CPAs. So there are a number of organizations that are focused on enhancing the profession in all ways, including, in the case of this last organization, especially from a DE&I perspective.
Yep. And I'm going to say I have to go revisit and see if my membership is still active with the National Society of Black Certified Public Accountants. NABA is one of those organizations that I've just always known about since I was in school. I also went to an HBCU where they had a presence there. They have student chapters. Ascend and Alpha are also on campuses. They also have national organization. They have chapters, local chapters. There are a lot of, it's a collective effort. That's what it is, right? I also, have a relationship with the Center of Audit Quality, who's also focused on this thing, right?
Absolutely.
So there are a lot of resources out there. What I find is that people just aren't familiar with them. So I'm glad that we have these discussions, because they can have that exposure, right? And ultimately, it's about creating opportunities for people to succeed. We just want to see everyone succeed, and where there's opportunity, we want to share. So thanks for bringing up those other organizations that are out here with the same goal that we are all having, which is to see each other, win and have success in our careers in accounting, and ultimately help the world. Accounting plays a major role in how the world operates. And I think people don't understand that. I was reading the Wall Street Journal and just going through different articles, and I just see like these things about, revenue and sales and equity. And it's like, these are all things that are on a balance sheet, which is what you study and know the ins and outs of, or in the income statement, right? You study, the ins and outs of to pass the CPA exam. So, accounting is the language of business. It's not just something we say, it is the truth. It's how banks make decisions. It's how people learn how to go and invest in right stocks. But if we don't have a way of recording and analyzing that data, which is what accountants do in a lot of ways, then it's hard to make those decisions, right? And not to say that all we do is just bookkeeping and numbers, right? Because I always say I work in an IT space. There are people who have special who work in specific industries, right? There are a lot of diversity in the things we do as accountants. We don't just do taxes, as we have mentioned earlier. So I think that there's plenty of opportunity. I want to ask this question because I know we're kind of coming up on the time.
No problem.
So was it your mother being a bookkeeper that inspired you to go into accounting, or what was kind of the purpose for why you wanted to choose to go into accounting and then become a CPA?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that. I've actually written on this a few times, and I think that my mother probably was the genesis. Even though I can't recall a time she ever actually suggested being an accountant, but I paid attention to what she was doing as a teacher. Admittedly, if I didn't become a CPA, becoming a teacher was pretty high on the list as well. My father was a math major and worked for the Department of Navy as a civilian. So I think they were both very number inclined folks at home. So I think that probably played a part. But I think when it came to becoming a CPA, I had accounting in my mind, and I took bookkeeping. My mother was a teacher, so I took bookkeeping in high school, 11th grade and 12th grade. And at the time, I think in the 11th grade, I was working at a drugstore as a cashier. Also clean the floors from time, but that had nothing to do with CPA. But I was a cashier, and I was working in the back of the pharmacy. And I remember one day, and I don't remember the gentleman's name. I wish I could, because he's probably the one I should give the CPA credit to. But he was asking me how school was going. I was saying school's going well, and he's asked what I was planning on doing after high school. And I knew I was going to college. I said, I think I'm going to become an accountant. And this is a pharmacy, black male pharmacist, just as it turns out. He immediately said, once I said accountant, without mentioning me, oh, so you're going to be a CPA. That was the first time I had heard the term before. I was like, I don't know. What is that? He said, well, it's a certified public accountant. You said you want to be an accountant, and if you're going to be an accountant, then you need to be the best. And I was like, oh. And I was like, the 15, 16-year-old me was like, oh, it was like an epiphany. It's like, oh, really? And then I did my research and I saw CPA. I was like, oh, okay. So that's what we're going to do. Because to me, and I'd say this to anybody, listen, if you're going to be an accountant, you need to be a CPA. Yeah. Now, let's be honest. Can you be successful as an accountant without a CPA? Yes, you can. There are lots of examples of people who can be, but I'll tell you, more often than not, you will be more successful as a CPA. For however successful you are as an accountant, and I'm not knocking that at all, you probably would have been even more successful as a CPA. So it was really just an offhand conversation. As a cashier at a pharmacy that really lit the spark. But that's where it happens a lot of times in life, is that there'll be these moments that just happen and you don't think much of them. But then when you look at what they created later, that was actually a pivotal moment. And I'd like to think in probably going to school as an accounting major, I probably would have still had CPA on my mind at some point. But for me, it was an early decision. Okay, here's what we're going to do. And it was that conversation that really sparked it for me.
Wow. It's always in hindsight when you realize that the depth of that moment, right? That's just how it happens in life. But, it's good that not only did somebody take the time and opportunity to educate you on what a CPA was, but that you also make the decision to say, I don't care what it is. Now that I've done my research, I see the value in this, and I'm going to go after it, regardless of the challenges, right? Like not doing it the first time, not passing the exam the first time.
Or second or third or fourth.
I don't want to go into all those, right?
Not one, not two, not three. It took a while, right?
Yeah, but you saw the vision of what it meant for you as the person you were going to become and now are today. And I just hope that somebody else who's watching this interview takes the same inspiration from this conversation. I think that's the common goal we all have as CPA, regardless of what color you are. Anybody who's passed the exam and has received the benefit of knowing the opportunities and the value wants the same for others, to share in that success. So that's why we do this. And I just want to thank you again for taking the time to share your journey, your story. Congratulations on your recent role as a CEO of the National Society of New York Society of CPAs. I know we have a lot to expect from you and the organization in that role, and we'll be looking out to hear about anything else that we could do to share with our community to just help lift more into the profession and create more great success stories. So Mr. Calvin Harris Jr., thank you very much for your time, and
thank you, Chris.
Get soon.